Welcome back to Chemical Safety at Work, the podcast. Gary Kent joins us remotely from Queensland this week. Gary is an accredited hazardous areas and high voltage auditor. He's a member of the Australasian Institute of Dangerous Goods Consultants, and he's also a specialised services manager at Tolk Group. Welcome, Gary.
Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us, start off by telling us a little bit about your experience in the industry and what your job entails?
Ooh, rightio. We'll try and keep it brief. Yeah, so I've been involved with hazardous areas, high voltage, latterly dangerous goods the last few years for 20, 30 years, oil and gas, coal mining, etc. It was previously TechServe, now Tolk, just been taken over. We're still in Mackay, but we cover the whole of Queensland, and also I venture into New South Wales, occasionally Tassie and occasionally Northern Territory, depending on where there's a regulatory requirement and people are asking for assistance with compliance with, or general consulting actually, all things hazardous area, high voltage and dangerous goods. Typically, our expertise is with coal mines, but that also extends to gas plants and ports, bioethanol, sugar, anywhere where there's a risk of explosion due to hazardous atmospheres or hazardous combustible dusts. And also then that leads into the dangerous goods side of things. Hazardous areas and dangerous goods dovetail quite nicely. And also a lot of our clients require site-wide audits. So the transport of dangerous goods is fairly well regulated and controlled, but once it gets onto site, things become a little more fluid. The training and awareness programs are not ideal for a lot of site personnel with warehousing, storage areas. And then the further you get away from those storage areas, the more it gets quite exciting, and it's a little bit like the Wild West at times because people just don't know.
Yep.
So your flammable liquids, your combustible liquids, your batteries, your gas bottles, the temptation for sites to have squirrel stores where, they might be many kilometres away from the main store, or they may have issues with how easy it is to book stuff in and out at odd times and over weekends. So if you're not careful, sites can lose control of it because other areas of the plant that perhaps aren't as dangerous goods aware, they start doing their own thing, and that's when you start to lose control, and the risk for each site and for organisations that have multiple sites, the risk starts to multiply, and sooner or later they're going to have an incident.
Yeah, sure. How do work sites go about making sure that the staff are educated and aware of the risks? And is that a challenge?
It is a challenge. Most sites these days, they will have induction requirements and competency requirements. And people that are working in stores and storage areas where they're handling and taking dangerous goods off transport, putting them into the stores, moving around the yards, they have a reasonable idea. And they generally, I've found, they want to do the right thing. They want to know. But other than occasional dangerous goods awareness courses, there's not a lot out there in terms of national certification, recognised certifications for people that need to control and handle dangerous goods. So we do find there is rather a gap in the knowledge. And then once you move away to workshops and contractor alleys, as I call them, where you have multiple contractors spread across sites, that sometimes they have dangerous goods cabinets, sometimes not, sometimes they're all mixed up, sometimes it's the back of trucks. On a fairly large scale, that's when you tend to find that there's shortcomings in the training and awareness for dangerous goods, people that have a need, but it's a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess that's where Tolk Group comes in, or your role in particular. So how can you support these organisations with these rather tangly situations, I guess?
Well, certainly. When it's a formal hazardous area, that's fairly easy. We can classify it. We can do the drawings, the zone drawings. I'm accredited auditor as well, so within house we can control that design process, documentation process, and check that it's compliant. But where that relates to the dangerous goods and control of, where we seem to do well with a lot of clients is we extend that auditing process to say, well, let's come and have a look, see what you've got, and relative to the approximately 6 to 8 main dangerous goods standards, we look at well, how are you handling it when it comes off the transport? Where are you putting the stuff? Where are your flammable liquids? Where are your combustibles? Where are things sneaking past and ending up in general population in stores when really they should be segregated and grouped together with like dangerous goods? And a perfect example is combustible liquids with flammable liquids. So your oils, your greases, your adhesives, those things, they sneak by quite a lot. Checking how they've got their separation and segregation, checking their quantities, their minor storage levels versus their major storage levels, the applicability then of either part or all of the relevant Australian standards, and completing an audit review. So we say, right, relevant to this standard, here's your different clauses where you've got tick, cross, fail, and then comments and photographic evidence as to where they may be falling short and how they can fix things. And we recognise that they can't do it immediately, but a lot of our relationships with clients have been built up over a number of years now, got a lot of repeat business. So you can see incremental improvements. And what clients like is that consistency of approach. If they've got 10, 15 sites, then we'll go around and look at all of them, apply the same metrics to them all, and they get a consistent reporting format out of us for all of their sites. So then the individual site managers or the group managers can then start to say, oh, we've got some system issues here, or we've got a specific problem on this site. And occasionally sites do go backwards, sometimes because they've changed personnel or they've suddenly increased their work throughput. So it's a case for them to keep track of things and to close out actions. And then when I go back the following year, just to see how things are sitting.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the vastness of some of these work sites, or particularly thinking about mine sites. The remoteness, the multiple locations, the vast workspaces, work sites. What are some of the other challenges around managing dangerous goods, particular to mining sites?
I think it's that they end up sometimes with changing scenarios where workplaces, it's almost like tidal, where they might need to move whole departments because of mining areas encroaching. They might need to reposition areas, get them refenced, move things. The other one is keeping track of their materials as well. So a lot of the sites use ChemAlert systems, which is it's a good product, but it's a behemoth. And to get the information you need out of it in a timely manner, especially if someone was in an emergency situation, tends to lend the best engineering or the best practice approach, I should say now, is to, yes, use ChemAlert, but everyone's returning to local recent copy SDSs that are stored at each dangerous goods location. And when those locations move, the SDSs move, so that if you or I had a chemical spill and we were needing first aid, then whoever comes to our assistance, they can readily get that information and don't have to rely on running to find a ChemAlert terminal, finding the right information, which could be in the system 3 or 4 times under different names, printing it out, finding the right info. It's there, right at the source of where the dangerous goods are stored. That is a common trait and trend that we're pushing again now. It's like, yes, the regulations say the information should be readily available, but what does that mean? If someone needs help, they need it ASAP, and it needs to be immediately on hand.
Exactly. That's great. And you mentioned combustible liquids earlier. Is that sort of the main substance you notice these sites holding? Is there any other substances that, pose quite a large risk on these sites?
Yes, well, combustible liquids it's a very close cousin to flammable liquids, separated by temperature and flash point. Because there's no nice little diamond pictogram for combustible liquids, it's got its own little rectangular sign that's recommended, but people don't always give it the respect that it deserves. It's
pushed to the side.
Yeah, well, yes, and that's why you see grease cartridges, lubrication cartridges, adhesives that are combustibles buried away in general store. When you start to collate them all together, there can be a significant quantity, and they should really be stored with or alongside the flammable liquids, because it's only temperature that separates them. And as the ambient temperature comes up, they very quickly start to reach their flash point. And then guess what? Combustibles, they're required to be treated as flammables when they get within 6 degrees of their flash point. So, and I often say to people, it's not a problem till it's a problem. But when you get a fire, those ambient temperatures are going to rocket really quickly. And something with a flash point over 100 degrees will very quickly reach its unstable state and start giving off vapors. And then you've got additional fire risk and fire load that you could do without. So I always say, pay attention to your combustible liquids. But the problem is they're not always labelled very well. You know, everyone looks and recognises the pictogram with the fire in it, the little flame. But there's an issue sometimes with SDS sheets. It's that they're not immediately apparent if they're defective or not up to standard unless people realise there's a problem and report it through to the regulators. The regulators aren't there policing every SDS before it's released to market. Yeah. And that means you can get goods with markings on it which are a little bit fluid in some instances, where it's a combustible liquid or it's a corrosive, but it might have an exclamation mark on it. And when you read it or look at the SDS, it'll actually say this is a combustible liquid, or this is a toxin, or this is a corrosive. You think that, well, you've not signed it very well. So the combination of just understanding what you may be dealing with, always checking the SDS sheets. If it's in ChemAlert, you've got half a chance that it's been checked. But that's a risk, that things aren't always properly labelled, and sometimes SDSs are a bit deficient. That adds to the general confusion and can explain why things like corrosives, but combustible liquids in particular, they sneak through and they find themselves in general storage population when they should be segregated.
You mentioned there the importance of managing temperatures with things like combustibles. What specific recommendations do you make in some of those harsher environments where you've got those high temperatures, deserts, and what other environmental factors can come into play?
Yeah, well, some places they're prone to a lot of lightning storms and dust storms. So IP ratings that's ingress protection ratings of your storage cabinets, or having decent shaded areas for your dangerous goods. So there's proprietary bunded dangerous goods containers, and they go up to some significant sizes, like 60,000 litres, coming right the way down to your normal flammable liquids or combustible liquids or corrosives, cabinets with bunded storage, self-closing doors, etc. So always go for proprietary storage devices, always go for shaded areas. If you've got to store things outside, try and avoid areas exposed to the western sun, because in the afternoon in hot locations it can bake, and you can get surface temperatures high 50s, 60 degrees, and that starts to create a problem for some of your combustibles with lower flash points. That the designation point is 60, 61 degrees between a flammable and a combustible. But if a combustible, typically like diesel, sits there at 63 and you've got that western sun beating down on it, you can find it starts to become unstable and vapors start to develop within the storage spaces on those hot days in the tropics and northern Australia. So, be mindful of shade, proprietary containers, and ready access. Make sure you've got ready access and your fire protection equipment is on hand, as are your first aid kits and your safety showers and your eye wash stations and your spill kits.
That's great. And so how can businesses train staff to properly identify and manage these substances on site?
Well, I always say try and seek out hazardous area and dangerous goods awareness training, so restrictions for areas, what to look out for labelling, about the segregation and separation. The problem you have is other than that initial awareness, where do they go? And that's where I suppose consultants come in, and I might myself available, so I'll go and do the dangerous goods audits for them. I'll give them their reports. I'll give them recommended actions and pragmatic solutions, but then also say, right, it's one thing telling you what the problem is, but I make myself available to say, right, let's have a meeting on site, make sure you understand the nature of the problem, and then hold their hand, if you like, to actually guide them through it, to say, because sometimes it's a bit like one of those kids' puzzles where you're moving the plastic squares around, trying to find the space and get that puzzle. To move one thing, you've got to do 15 others.
Yeah.
And when you apply that, for example, on the combustible liquids where they're scattered around the stores, it could be days of work because you can't just create space, and you want to put things in the right place and have them separated. But to do that, you've got to reorganize half your stores. And how are you going to find time for that when it's fully operational? Sometimes they're running 24/7. So consultants being available to help guide them through. It isn't just a matter of do the report or do the design and then say, we'll see you later. You've got to be prepared to say, right, do you need a hand to get this fixed and implemented?
Exactly. It's that key ongoing support and commitment, isn't it?
Other than storing combustibles in general stores and things like that, are there any other mistakes that you see commonly on some of these work sites?
Yes, gas bottles. Understanding the relationship between minor storage, major storage. This applies to any dangerous goods, but particularly gas bottles. But then where your legislation will call up your placarding limits for quantities, and then it goes into manifesting limits, which are reportable to the regulators, and having the information readily available at the site entrance for your external fire authorities. That causes a lot of confusion. And there's the perennial issue of confusing empties and full bottles, because when you're doing tally counts of the different gas types, you're obliged to count the empties as full because they're never properly empty. They're always pressurized. So having proper storage, ideally with all-weather access, concrete floors, area lighting, but outside of the immediate vicinity of the gas bottles, proper signage, separation of empty and full, making sure you keep the oxygen away from your flammables, your LPGs and your acetylens. That seems to be a problem. And what leads to this is inventory control. Sometimes with these sites, they have remote inventory facilities where persons other than the immediate site buying officers will control when to flag purchase orders, and the system can incorrectly generate it. I need 6 more. 6 more what? 6 more bottles or 6 more racks of 6 bottles? And then you can find that next minute you get this big delivery arrive on site, and they go, oh, what are we going to do with this? It creates an overspill. It means they've got to find somewhere to put it that isn't designated for the purpose, and that just accentuates the control of gas bottle problems. So that's an issue that we come across time and time again.
That's really interesting. You mentioned about those deliveries. I guess is transient storage something that comes up a bit in mine sites?
Yes, it can be. Normally where they have a central warehousing facility or purchasing facility that will bring the goods into there before they dispatch them out on a milk run to the different sites. But a lot of sites are recognizing the problems with transient stores, because then you're introducing another facility that has to have greater hazardous area or dangerous goods, particularly awareness and training of staff, whereas they're starting to say, well, why don't we just get those things dispatched directly to the site? So transit stores, not as much of a problem as they used to be, but certainly your transport companies, the tolls of this world, the IPEX, they would certainly have ongoing issues where they're holding things for multiple different clients. A lot of the times we get involved with clients that have groups of sites, so they tend to take a higher level view. And when I've said to them, why are you holding product XYZ, like liquid nitrogen, for example, which is inherently leaky, 160 litre flasks, inherently leaky. When they come to use it, half the time it's empty, and they're storing 2 or 3 of them on each side. Why? And then have a look at alternative hotshot arrangements. These things get brought up and discussed, and then they change their group philosophy as to how they may hold and transport certain goods.
Do you consult with many work sites out at sea?
No, not so much in this life. I used to do, when I was more into oil and gas, and used to travel around the world on visiting various oil rigs and things. And that's an added dimension as well, is that how much stock do you hold of dangerous goods, because of you may not always get reliable resupply options if it's stormy weather, for example.
Yep.
Can you get a boat out, or have you got to fly stuff in? And if you're flying stuff in, it's not the best option for dangerous goods.
Yeah, they must pose some very unique challenges as well. But I think you've just answered one of those challenges.
Gary, can you tell us a little bit about what's kept you passionate about being in this area for so many years?
Oh, having the curly problems, if you like, because I live and breathe this stuff, and you've met me and now you've heard me. I'm not short of a thing to say, and it's just a matter of, well, what point do people glaze over? You have to be careful of that, but it's making sure that you can provide a valuable contribution that actually improves a site's compliance, improves the workers' knowledge, improves the scenario. No one likes to be involved in a problem. Again, coming back to my favourite saying, it's not a problem till it's a problem. We all need to go home safely. We all need to believe that we've done a good job and we can lie straight in our beds at night. And that means consistency of approach, keeping up with the latest standards and advice, and actually getting the information out there, being helpful to people. I don't think it does anyone any good to hold on to the information and knowledge
Absolutely.
as a source of power. It's about getting the information out there and helping people.
That's amazing. That's really good. And I guess looking forward, how do you see storage standards and practices evolving in areas like mining to enhance safety and compliance?
Well, it's interesting because mining are inherently dangerous and dirty occupations. They involve hazardous areas, dangerous goods, and high voltage. And they also try and take advantage of alternative energy, cost reductions, etc. So there's a lot of mine sites do a lot of green work with water treatments and solar or wind power, etc. Hydrogen is coming along very quickly, and I don't think it'll be too long before. In fact, there was an email come through this morning about the upskilling courses for engineers and consultants about how hydrogen is going to fit in with the mix, and how are we going to change our thinking, not only in hazardous areas, but dangerous goods, the way it's used and transported and generated, and the types of facilities where you actually get the fuels and the dangerous goods from. Whether it's heavy goods vehicle refueling, whether it's charging stations and the different colours of hydrogen, where it's manufacturers and how it fits in with the whole process. So I think there is big changes afoot, especially in the hydrogen space and alternative energy space. And dare I say, if nuclear, which is a hot topic at the moment, if that comes to the fore in future years, there's another complexity to our energy and dangerous goods mix.
Yeah, the landscape could look very different.
Oh, I think so. And the way we generate and move fuels around, I think is going to have a lot of change.
How much has the industry changed over the course of your career to date in terms of regulation, attitudes towards safety, and different ways people are managing dangerous goods?
A lot. These days, people expect workplaces to have standard operating procedures, risk assessments, PPE, safety officers, and they expect to be given good advice and good training, which is good because everyone wants to go home safe. From years ago, what was commonplace tomfoolery and messing around, and as an apprentice you used to get picked on a bit, that just doesn't wash anymore. And also the advent of having more women in engineering and mine sites and things, that's a positive. You've only got to look at what might be happening overseas. And so occasionally we get involved in overseas consultancy as client representatives to go and check out equipment and goods to see if they're going to comply with Australian standards and what the client might have to do to them to make them acceptable for use on their site. And when you see some of the safety standards on foreign sites and manufacturing facilities, it's like stepping back in time, and it makes you realise just how far we've come, especially in leading manufacturing nations such as Australia, where health and safety compliances and regulatory standards are such a big impact. Yeah, and I think it's a good thing.
That's very promising to hear. Are there any other trends or innovations in hazardous materials management that you see shaping the future of safety and compliance in the industry?
I think the use of mobile devices like phones and apps to track quantities, to track storage locations, to upload audit results and photographs of conditions, both on a maintaining and compliance aspect, but also in terms of potential accident and risk assessment, knowledge and assistance. There's an awful lot, I think, that can be done in that space. And I think we'll see more and more of that information coming onto your phones and tablets to make it easier to say, well, what am I storing where? What does it currently look like? What was the latest information? Have I even got CCTV there to see what the conditions are like, etc.? Just so you can keep the more up-to-date information you have, the better your decision-making ability.
Is there any sort of major tips or any final comments you'd like to share with our subscribers as to how they could improve their safety on site today?
Don't be shy. Ask. You know, you've got to get past that, oh, I don't want to ask that question because I might sound stupid. Chances are someone else is thinking about it. But I think if you can find consultants that are happy and engaging and happy to provide the advice and just go the extra mile to say, okay, well, this is what you need to do. And rightio, now you're going to need assistance with how to do it. But make yourself available so that if people don't know, they can pick up the phone or they can drop you an email, send you a text and just ask. As I say, one of the things I enjoy is the particularly curly nature of things that you may have not come across before, and you go, oh, need to think about that.
Yeah.
And also, you know, it's a learning process. We're applying experience and knowledge of standards and regulations, but it's important to talk to people on the site to understand how they do things and why they do what they do, because there may be some valid rationale that we've not considered as an outside consultant, and it's go, oh, okay, this is why they do that, and that could put a whole new light onto how you then interpret and give them potential solutions, because I don't believe anyone goes to work to do a bad job or to be unsafe. It's normally because of there's reasons why they're having to do stuff or because they don't know of a certain requirement.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Chemical Safety at Work podcast. It's been very insightful and we've learned a lot, especially around mine sites. It'll be great to stay connected, and we'll obviously drop a link in the show notes below so our listeners can find you and find out a bit more about yourself and Tolk Group and the services you provide.
And to the listeners, thank you very much for tuning in again. Hope you got a lot out of today's episode. Tune in again next week. We'll be discussing lithium-ion batteries again, but this time with electrical engineer and sealed performance batteries director, Ryan Hammond. We'll talk to you then.